Wait, are you are you gonna count me in? Whatever. I'm just gonna go for it. Welcome to the Queen's Lead podcast. I'm your host, Amy Singleton, and as a child of the 80s, I'd love to say queens rule, but they don't. Queens lead. Being a queen means you are worthy to be a leader of people. The guests on our show do exactly that. They are leading the way in their businesses, families, and communities. And they're taking their rightful place in the spotlight, leading and inspiring the developing queens in all of us. Welcome to the Queen's Lead podcast.
Now here's your host, Amy Singleton, the queen of realness, leading conversations about business, life, and the real shit you want to know.
Enough of this pre-show banter. We've been on here for 20 minutes. You guys don't even know that because I just hit record. But welcome back to another episode of the Queen's Lead podcast. I'm your host, Amy Singleton, and I am stoked to have one of my newest friends that I met in Cancun this year. She is from Scotland, but she lives in Kentucky, which is a whole nother story in and of itself. I like to refer to her as Denise DeNephew due to an inside joke that happened. But everybody, welcome my friend Denise from Scope.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Amy.
So everybody, you already know that we're all obsessed with your accent, so we could just talk about anything all day. But first, tell us a little bit about just who you are and then what Scope is.
Sure. So I'm Denise, came to the US from Scotland, obviously. Don't have that US accent like you lucky folks. But, I came from Scotland when I was 16. I moved to the US to play soccer, which was a great experience for me. I got to go into a whole family of new friends. And after that, I actually graduated, and went home for a little bit and had culture shock again. So I came back and did my master's degree, coached some soccer to get through that, and then went about life, which took me to an internship in Louisville, Kentucky, and I've kind of never really left that area. So just across the bridge in Indiana now, a wee bit more into I like to have my space and some grass and some chickens. So I like to move out of the city into more of a rural setting. And that was it. Life now with, we take care of my niece and nephew. They are 16 twins. So that is a blast. Wow. And super stoked about that. And now we just live out here with the chickens. And that started Scope about 3 years ago, which is a more of an operations and finance company to help people really, one of the things that we say about it is you can't outsell or outwork a weak operation. And so that's really hard to come to terms with at times. And we've all been through it, right? I'm not saying we haven't too. I put that on me because it was something that I tried, right? I tried to outwork the weak pieces of things. And unfortunately that doesn't work because the infrastructure will crack. And that was where Scope's design really came from. Scope stands for the successful collaboration of partners and entrepreneurs because we feel that we are true collaborators. We don't ever want to come in and take over your business because it's your idea. We just want to help you come around the corner into a nice, smooth runway of what you want to do. I don't care what you want to do. I just want to help you do it.
I love that. Oh my gosh. So this is probably going to be the weirdest question out of everything that you just said, but how long did it take you to quit saying football and start saying soccer for our asses?
Probably my whole life. I still make the mistake a few times. I've gotten in a couple of conversations where we're definitely talking about the wrong sport. But I'm getting there. 16 years later, I'm finally recognizing that it's a different shaped ball and we throw that one. Don't kick it.
That's right. It probably hurts a little more. So I don't know. There's a lot of running in your football. So, okay. I definitely want to get into, because we had some great conversations before we got on here about how the operations affect the finances, how all of that affects marketing, how that affects the business overall. What are we trying to be? Are we boutique or are we mass production? What are we? And I want to get into all of that. But first I want to rewind back because this is my favorite question. Tell me about little girl Denise.
Well, she had this bright blonde hair. So she was tiny, and it was certainly, for me, growing up, I had this really unique experience in my life where at a young age, I discovered I was quite a spiritual human being. Grew up super Catholic, right? So really into the religion side of things too, but also had this really spiritual experience. But also I was kind of like a book nerd, I like to just read and learn and absorb. And so, that eclectic triangle, shall we say, has sort of morphed me into the human I am today of, I want to help and take care of people, but I have this weird drive. And so really a lot of like driving forward, but a lot of empathy came from my childhood experiences of having some things like in my life, maybe some things like that we don't think about every day. So I have this power of, or I would say superpower, and actually I think it's more of a humbling experience for me that I can connect to the other side. And that was discovered in my childhood. So that was an exciting part for me. Not that I knew it at the time. It's been something that I've grown into, but having that where I could see more of things in the world than other people has given me this great lens to say, there's more beyond, but there's also a lot here. And how do we morph the two of like knowing what goes on here and what goes on beyond?
Yeah. And I want to hear, so I've heard this story. I want you to tell my listeners that story, because the next thing I want to talk about is our health and our mental health. And I think that it's from an outside perspective of someone who is maybe has some intuition or a little more spirituality, a little more connectivity with things that most people just don't understand. And a lot of people, especially where I live, have a lot of trouble reconciling that with their faith. So can you tell the story of what happened when you were a little girl and you saw something that maybe not everybody else was seeing?
Yeah, so this is an interesting story. And so I was about 6 years old, and my grandma on my dad's side, who was technically my great aunt, right, but I called her Gran my whole life, so that's how I knew her. And one of the things that I remember most about her, she loved a pearl necklace, right? She was very classy, and that was always hard for me because I was like a super tomboy growing up, going like, where's my football boots or where's my soccer cleats, going on, she was always like, just sit down and be clean for a minute, and
drink your tea.
Yeah, exactly. Just sit here and play the piano or something that's not like rugged, right? But she was a great human being. She had so much intelligence and intellect. So I was always fascinated by her conversations. And I used to visit her on a Monday, which is how I learned to tell military time, because at 1800 I had soccer. So we got to leave at 17:30, right? Because she told military time. So
yeah.
When she got sick and it was her birthday, I had bought her a plant she just to brighten up her room at the hospital. I was like, I'm gonna take her this plant. So little 6-year-old me walking around with my plant, super proud, like taking my gran her plant. This will definitely make her feel better. And unfortunately, she passed away. So she passed away on her birthday, which that is something that has always fascinated me in terms of being born and then dying on the same day. Like, how cool is that to have a complete cycle of like birth to death, right?
Yes.
Exact.
I get chills thinking about it. It's like a completed circle, It's very,
And that just felt like her, right? That to me, that circle was just her. She was the circle of life. She did take in 8 children that were not hers, but she couldn't bear to watch them leave. And, so that was like full circle for her. And so my parents had to take me to my other grand's house on my other side, who was my best friend my whole life. I spent so much time with her, but they took me there and I was ready to go. I was 6 years old, so I didn't really understand what had occurred. And I was in my grand's and she was saying like, sit down. And I was walking around, I'm a pacer. When I'm nervous, I'm a pacer. So I like to pace. And I was in the kitchen, and it was a what I would call like a gully kitchen, right? So it's a 1-lane, very small, very old British kind of kitchen that you would see in more of a movie now. Like there was hardly space for 2 people to be face to face in there, but we were.
That's what I call a 1-ass kitchen. That's a 1-ass kitchen. That's right. I barely have 2-ass kitchens. If there's 3 asses, there's no room to move. So that's a 1-ass kitchen. Got it.
A 1-ass kitchen, exactly, right? So we're standing there, and I'm like, I really want to give him a plant to my gran, and my other gran was like, well, darling, you can't. She's not going to be there now, And she was trying to very kindly explain to me what had happened. And I was so confused, and I kept looking at her like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? She's right here. And so it was at that point I discovered I was the only person that could, like, I could see her. My gran couldn't see her. Well, like, my other gran couldn't see her, but I'm like, I want to give her the plant. She's here and I've not got her birthday present. So like
Oh
panic
my
mode me.
gosh.
And my other
Could you
gran,
hear her too?
yeah.
I mean, was
So
she speak? Yeah. Okay.
So I have evidential mediumship, which was after, years later and studying it and understanding it. What I have is a gift called evidential mediumship, where I can sort of hear, see, feel, like it puts it through my body if something's happening, or and so like I could feel that she wasn't in any pain, right? But I knew she was in the hospital, so it was weird for me to see her okay, up and walking. It was weird for me to like see what I knew as my gran being completely okay in my other gran's house, which, thinking back, that probably wouldn't have really happened logistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at 6 years old, all I was worried about was giving her the present.
Wow.
And sharing that. And I was like, oh, I'm so bummed. But my other gran had this really unique way of helping me understand it. And now looking back, like, I had no idea that's what she was doing at that time, because she used to tell me the story about her dad, because I think this must be what I've learned from then, is that this is really get passed down through the generations. And what she would always tell me was a story about her dad, and her dad died on Good Friday. And I come from a very Catholic family, right? So like big day Good Friday is, and
Yes.
he worked, and my grandma always told me the story that he came home from work on a Wednesday and said, "I've talked to Mary. I'm going to die on Friday." Now this was 2 days before, and he came home and said that at his family dinner, right, as if it's nothing. And my grandma always said how shocked she was to hear that, but in a weird way, she felt a lot of comfort from it, that he knew he was going somewhere else. And sure as heck, he did die on Good Friday, right where he said he would. It was like this really eerie story. But I think my gran knew that would give me comfort to know I wasn't alone, even though maybe from like an old kind of Scottish woman's way of communicating, right? Very like closed off and sort of not knowing what to say or how to explain it. She would tell me stories of other things that she knew had happened to give me the comfort to know maybe I'm not alone, and I will find that right circle and sphere to have this thing one day. But don't also run around telling people that you see the dead people, right? Because
what an absolute queen she was for that. I mean, what a queen. So we put the crown on when we have queenly moments here. But I mean, like, imagine, luckily, I guess it runs in families, but imagine you not having her as that resource there. And I can't imagine how alone you would feel. And I mean, obviously they've made movies about this here and there, but to actually experience it yourself, how terrifying, but how comforting to have her spirit there. And I love that she led you through it with this story.
Yeah.
Because isn't it our stories that help one another through, no matter what it is?
Yeah.
We were collecting content with a client yesterday. We rented out a coffee shop and brought all the things down. And she's in grief. She's like a grief coach. She lost her son to an accidental drowning. And when he was 4 years old, 25 years ago, and she had fallen asleep. She was an exhausted mom is what had happened. And she felt so much guilt and shame. And it was someone telling a story to her that had written her a letter that was finally kind of the catalyst to help her start moving on. And so that was just such a reminder of like telling your stories without shame, telling your stories, to the people that matter, the people that are going to take it and be able to run with it and make a difference in their lives with it is such a huge deal.
Yeah, because I think, as you said, like the story is what makes it. It's the part of the connection, right? It's the one thing that links us back to know that someone else has had this experience. Because I think that's where it takes a huge toll on our own mental health or our physical health. Because I think our mental and physical health are very connected, and that when you're really feeling that mental fatigue, that you do tend to just continue on the blame and the shame instead of trying to lift it up. But another experience that's very similar or parallel to yours might be like, okay, I'm not the only one that this happens to. There are other like people around that are around. I've just maybe got to find them, and that's always such a powerful thing.
It's huge. And I just, I think this is such a beautiful conversation that's being opened up, because I remember, after my divorce, the reason for my divorce, I felt so alone. I felt like I was the only woman that had ever experienced that. My client yesterday said, I thought I was the only mother. I felt like, intellectually, it's
Right.
happened to others, but you feel so alone in these moments. And it takes a regular, real life, tangible person, I think, raising their hand and saying, hey, me too.
Yeah.
I've been there. I've experienced that. I've been through what you're going through. I resonate with you. I feel you. When you're going like in those depths, you're going, no one else understands how I feel. When someone actually goes, no, I actually do. You're like,
Right.
oh, thank God. Tell me what is the way? Show me this light, shine a light on my path, at
Yeah.
least just on that next step. So talk to me a little bit about how that did affect your mental health through your childhood and teenage years.
Yeah, I think it was confusing. It was one of those things, it was very difficult to then tell other people, right? And I know that we all have things like that, so I don't mean to convey
Yeah.
that this was more difficult than any other teenager ever had it. But it was difficult because, one, I was and I was like really into sports. So that really wasn't my crowd. At least I didn't feel like that. I'm sure as adults, everybody changes. But when you're
Yeah.
sort of part of a team, you don't want to be the odd person out, right? Or the one that everyone's like, we're not picking you. And so, I was always very conscious about like where I would do that. And luckily, I did have one space in my gran that gave me that. When she nicknamed me Magic, most people had no clue why. They'd be like, why did she call you Magic? And I'm just like, it's just our thing. It's nothing that anyone really has to know about, because I think it is one of those topics where, that you're not sure how people are going to react to it. And I never want to overwhelm someone, nor is my belief the way that anyone else has to believe, right? These are just how I've framed my own beliefs through experience in ways that I've definitely, seen and been in different places that I've never physically seen and been before. And to me, that is wild, right? It's just a wild thing that I can say I've been there, but I know I have not been there in a logical facet. So that can be difficult to then explain to others. So I think for a lot of my teenage years, I had all of this gunk in there of like, I'm part of the church. This doesn't really go with that. I'm part of these sports teams. It doesn't really go there. I'm part of kind of book smart kind of thing. So it doesn't really go there. Where does this piece in my life go? And it really wasn't until I sat down and thought, this has got to stop, right? Or like this overriding noise has to stop in my life, and I've got to stop letting it distract me or affect my daily, emotional well-being. And, sort of during COVID, about 6 months before COVID, I really started diving deep into it. And COVID gave me that opportunity to really focus on a new skill, like it did for a lot of people. I started building, this. And so being able to really articulate it and understand how it works and why it's there, and really begin to lift that burden on my mental health, which was really a big step for me, because it was one of the things that I'd never really understood how heavy it was weighing on me.
Yeah. You just don't know how, I don't want to say bad, but just how oppressed you feel until you don't feel it anymore. They say that often in heart surgery, after someone has a bypass surgery, they didn't realize how tired they had been feeling until the gunk, you even said the gunk in your head was cleaned out. And then there's this sense of relief that you can kind of reconcile moving forward. So I'm so glad you had that experience. Talk to me a little bit about, so we were talking before this, and I think it's always a good time to talk about mental health. It's always a good time to not be shamed about mental health. It's always a good time not to be upset that you have, been handed something like cancer or lupus or an autoimmune disease or a mental illness. We don't feel guilt about those things, yet somehow we feel guilt about the mental health. And for me, those two things are so completely integrated. I'll briefly share about an experience I recently went through. I suffer with autoimmune disorders of various kinds, and I've run away from my doctors for a really long time because the medicines that they use to treat this, guys, they suck. Let me just tell you, they all suck. They don't make you feel good. But my young son that's 16 was just recently diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. So I took him in to see a rheumatologist, felt led to go ahead and reestablish care with mine. And so they started me on a medicine. I had to ramp up on that medicine for 5 weeks, one shot in a row every 5 weeks. And then it goes monthly. Well, by shot 4, I was wrecked, guys. I was freaking My body was awful. Like I could barely move. My mental fog, which is probably one of the worst symptoms I get. It was kind of like a big flare, right? A big flare of my lupus. And so that led to physical feeling bad, led to mental fog, led to physical fatigue, led to physical pain, led to mental pain, anguish. And then everything for me just starts spiraling. And especially as a business owner, when everything's kind of on your shoulders, hopefully you've built some systems in a team, and luckily I have. So I was able to take that rest I needed. However, I was ready to give it up, guys. I'm telling you right now, like this episode of Queen's Lead almost didn't happen, because if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, I'd have been like, I'm giving it up. My mental health is wrecked. I'm eating all the sugar. I'm leaning into all my not my old addictions, luckily, but just new ones, food addiction, TV, anything that is going to numb this pain. So I know that you, Denise, also have an autoimmune disease. Can you kind of share, yours is a little less commonly known. So can you explain what that is, kind of how you came to that diagnosis, and how that affects your mental and physical health as a person and as a business owner?
For sure. So I got diagnosed with a disease called Myasthenia Gravis back in 2008. And so as a teenager, like I said earlier, I came to the United States to play soccer, and it was discovered through my eyes. We were going on to the conference championships at the time. And it was an early Saturday morning practice, I remember, because the band were on, and it used to make practice very difficult to hear, because the band were right here and we were right here. And so I vividly remember it. And the play, it was like our coach had kind of designed this play. We were playing a really fast team, so we had to kind of come up with a fast break. And it was going goalkeeper, right back, left midfield, which was me, striker, right? So almost like one touch, boom, boom, boom. And our striker at the time was quick. So it was like, okay, in behind. And the right back kept crossing the ball to me. And every time I'd look up, I would miss it. Couldn't see it. And so, I mean, I had the coach who was from England at the time, and he was going berserkers. He'd be like, Denise, get it together. And I'm like, I'm trying, man. I just can't see. And so,
Wow.
And so after the practice, he was like, you go get new contacts or whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and do that. So the athletic trainer, right, because I'd never had to do this in a new country at 16 years old before. So
yeah,
athletic trainer takes me down to the optometrist. They get me an appointment, get me in there that day to test my contacts. The optometrist sent me to an ophthalmologist. The ophthalmologist sent me to a neurologist, and that was pretty much it. I had a tumor from sort of the top of my neck to the base of my back. And myasthenia gravis comes from what's called your thymus gland. Everyone has it, but it shrinks by the time you're 3, and it stops doing what it's supposed to do until you're 3, and then it shrinks and goes away, and you don't need it. But unfortunately, mine didn't do that. It grew and it grew and it grew and it grew until eventually it was taking over my body. And then I had these problems through my eyes that it was causing, because there was no way for my body to fight against it any longer. And so that was, I mean, at the time I was only 16 years old, and I think, it was one of those things where you're not quite as afraid as you don't show that you're afraid, right? It's like, okay, this is one of those things. So that happened in the October, and I did not play soccer again really after that, or like it was kind of like my career was over. I did come back for a brief 19 seconds, and I broke my sternum bone, but that was not very long. So I don't talk about that. I don't say it's a comeback.
Sternum?
Yeah, so I have
that's really hard to do.
Yes, it's one of those bones that you don't hear of people breaking. So naturally, I broke it. I had to, it just seems natural for me to do that. Why would I not do it?
Right,
so I don't really mention my comeback era, because it was not much of an era. It was a rapid 19 seconds. But so really, from a very longevity perspective, it was about that time where my soccer career was over. And luckily, that English coach that yelled at me that day, he also allowed me to keep my scholarship and coach instead. So like he was one of the biggest influences in my college career that actually made me go back into working in higher education for a long part of my career, is because like I believe so much in that. It just takes one person to change what your trajectory could be. He could have sent me home. He could have said, you're not bringing the value that I brought you in to bring. And but luckily he didn't. He saw past that and saw beyond it, and gave me the chance to like finish out my degree and do things. And he was the one that drove me back and forth to the appointments that were 2 hours away. And I, now that I'm at and now I'm at a more adult age of being able to recognize like he was only my age when that was happening to him, and like how much that would have really, you know, influenced his life and been a super inconvenience, you know, to get up at 4 a.m. to make sure I was down there for whenever. I remember after coming back, I had the first surgery in January of 2009, and you know, they took it out, but it was a 16-hour surgery. I kind of lost the function of one of my lungs. Like, it was a big deal. I was in the hospital for months and months on end, but I was 2.5 hours away from campus. So like, I didn't have anyone. And that was, and luckily I had some people that were just kind enough to give up part of their life to be with me. And so like, if I can ever do that for someone else, like that's a pay it forward for me. Because there was certainly my best friend on the team, like her mom drove 6 hours and she was from Louisville, drove 6 hours from Louisville just to watch Snapped with me. Right. And I realized that all of the episodes of Snapped either happen in Texas or West Virginia. So I was like, those are the places I'm going to try and avoid in my life. Right. But it was things like that that really got me through the mental side of things, of that sometimes it wasn't that they could stay for long, and it wasn't because they had lives and things, but it was that someone took the time to be able to come and see me or be able to just spend a weekend with me when I couldn't go anywhere. I was hooked to machines or whatever that might be. And then sort of left with the lasting impact of myasthenia gravis, which has caused, you know, blindness and deafness in my left eye and ear. So I now don't have sight or hearing on one side, and there's sort of weird symptoms that go with it that no one knows why and no one can control. So like you, I've done a lot of the abandonment of doctors, just because it was like at one point after that big surgery, I was on something like 92 medications, and I'm like, that can't be the way. Like, that just can't be it, because it was only treating whatever the outcome of the other one was, and it just felt I remember going home like years later, and my gran said to me, she's like, that's quite a lot, that, isn't it? And it wasn't until she was just so like blunt about it, and she wasn't meaning it in a bad way. She just saw this bag that I had of like, you know, shaking around all the time, and like every 30 minutes some alarm would go off, and it was just, that to me is what took a big toll on my mental health, because it kept reminding me that it kept making me feel like I didn't have the ability to do things. And myasthenia gravis is weird like that. The only thing that actually helps it is mainly rest. So, and because you can't see it, you can see it certainly behind closed doors where like my eye won't function, it will close, right? I don't know why it does that, but that's one of the symptoms, right? Just like you close one eye, or, you know, my legs don't kick in because my nerves and my muscles aren't talking. And so it does get you, and I'm with you, I get into that spiral of like, well, can't hear, can't see, can't walk, can't really swallow anything because you know, my throat muscles are done in for the day. Like, it feels so, I don't know about you, but it feels pitiful to me. And I'm like, I'm a human being that can do normal things at noon, but yet by 5 p.m. I look like an old horse that needs to be taken out. And and so it's sort of one of those things
that should not be so freaking relatable, but it is. Like, and thank God I don't have, I mean, and I hate comparing like big T, little T, my trauma, your trauma. We both struggle with things, right? And like, you feel the bottom line is the feeling is the same. Yeah. Whether you are out there and you have myasthenia gravis, or you have lupus, or you have diabetes, or you have freaking, I almost said the F word, freaking something that you're dealing with, because aren't we all dealing with something? But it can make you feel so much shame. For me, I feel a lot of shame. I feel like I'm a 43-year-old woman. I should be able to think through 20 emails in my inbox, yet my brain fog is so bad that I feel like an idiot. Like, you know, and I can't even function. I can't even lead because, you know, I can get up and move and walk okay, but my brain sucks. Or my brain's okay, but my body hurts so bad I can't move it. And I should be able to do these things, and we should on ourselves. And it's especially difficult, I think, when, you know, we're not in a wheelchair, right? Or we don't wear this big badge of, you know, like, it's not super obvious what we're dealing with. And be, well, you don't look sick. You know, what's wrong with you? Why can't you know, why are you canceling plans late or this or that? And then it really just goes into that spiral of kind of leaning into the ease, you know, the things that feel easy. But then you said later, once you feel better, you're like, oh, why did I do all these? Why did I eat all that? Or why did I watch all that trash TV?
Yep. Yeah, why didn't I just go for a walk? I probably would have felt better, or
I
like,
know.
there was a video I saw yesterday that felt really relatable to me. It's like, when you've been sick, right? Or you've been down for a few days, your body's not been working, and you know that nothing will make you feel better other than a shower. But you're so far from being able to like mentally push through to get your ass into the shower. But you know the result. Like I fight with that a lot, right? Of like, I know if I just do this, it's going to break some of these barriers that I'm having, or it's going to help me go, okay, breath, I'm okay. I don't need to panic, right? It's coming back, or I'm going to feel better at some point. Yeah. But it felt really relatable like that yesterday when she was like, I'm so far from the shower. She's like, she's like, I feel like I need to go and I know what's going to happen to me. She's like, but I feel like I'm 4 days away from that point.
Yeah.
And it's like it's having to push through those barriers because it is difficult. And almost like, I think one of the questions you'd asked was, how does that feel as a business owner? And I like the way you put it, you should on yourself, right? You're always saying what you should be doing, but I feel like at some point I want to just snap out of it. And sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes the fog is not snappable, if you will, like of going like, get it together, right? Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get up. I'm going to move. I'm going to do these things. And sometimes the brain fog feels so heavy that you can't quite even get to there. And I think when you have other people that experience that, because again, like you said, you can't see it. You can't see that my body is literally eating away at the muscles inside of it. But I know that it's happening. I feel that. That's a pain.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, right. Where like other people might not see it, and like you said, they're like, well, "That's weird. Like, what are you not doing this today for?" Right? Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things I've just kind of learned in my own business life is that 1, it will always be there tomorrow. 2, will never really be done, and 3, if someone can't accept that is like a real truth from me, and I try and be forward about it, even as I bring clients on. Like, there are some times that this happens, and I do have a team that's going to take care of it. That's why we have the systems in place that we do. So please follow the ticket route so that it's not just coming at me, because if I'm sick, I might not see it, right? That's why I have a team, and my team are all aware of these things. And like, so I think as a business owner, it's about how do you not be afraid to say some of the things that you have to, and that will actually build the long-term relationship a lot more strong, but also be able to convey that you're not in any danger just because sometimes I might get sick. My entire team know this. My team probably know more things than I do about you, because that's what their job is to dig deep and know everything, and to be able to help me do what I do best. And so as a business owner, I try and not force myself to snap out of it, because if I snap out of it too soon, I'm not a good service to anybody. So sometimes you just got to ride the wave, let the wave be how big it is. And then when it crashes, you're going to come back above the water, and you can walk out of that wave and be all right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that's so right on. And I want to use this opportunity to transition into talking about those systems and operations that we all need in business. But I don't want to leave this section without saying, when you are in the middle of like a mental health, even if it's just a small dip in your mental health, maybe you're not feeling like I can't shower today, but there is no such thing as going from here to there. Like, there's no just magic pill. There's no magic bullet. And one of the things this client, the grief counseling client that we were with yesterday, mentioned was that the hardest thing when we're in grief or we're feeling bad is to sit with it. Mm-hmm. Just sit with it. Just be with it. Just accept it for what it is. Because when we're feeling that pain, and I know this is very true for me, used to, I would turn to a bottle. Thank God I don't anymore. But now I do sometimes turn to food, or I'll turn to TV or something like that, to something that feels comforting, like a blanket. But when you lean into those things, those are the things that expand, right? But when you lean into the small, and let me tell you what a small little step sometimes it looks like toward that shower, toward that wellness, toward that. For me, it was a step to the mailbox. I say, like, my bravest moment was checking my mail, because when I couldn't move off the couch, it was literally, I couldn't get to that shower, Denise. Mm-hmm. I had to barely just go out my door to check the mail. Then I had to barely go to the kitchen to make me some food. And then maybe I'd wash my face. And then maybe the next day I'd take a shower. Like, there are those tiny steps forward that if you can just sit with where you're at, recognize it for what it is, and then take the steps to get out of it and not numb it away with whatever it is that we're doing. And sometimes, just like you said, sometimes the only answer, especially for you, is rest. Yeah. Take the rest. Take it. Take it, girl. Take your rest. So, but let's talk about, how does a business owner get that rest, Denise? Like, people, you used to be majorly into the world of finance. Now I think it sounds like you've recognized, much like I have in marketing, that business owners need a little bit of help first before they're really ready for that financial piece. So talk to me about operations and what that looks like for the average business owner that doesn't really quite have it all together yet.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for that last part of the sentence is very normal, right? And I think we have to normalize it, is that you're not going to have it all together from the get-go, right? And you might see this really expansive growth because what your deliverable is doing is real. It is helping people. It is solving a problem. And that part is amazing. But when you see sort of exponential growth and you've maybe never done it before, you don't quite anchor back to knowing that, well, I have to have these foundations in order for me to keep delivering at this level. So a lot of times when you start, your capacity is really high because you've not got a ton of clients yet and you've not sold a lot of things. So you've got so much time to dedicate to those maybe few clients that you have. But as volume increases, capacity decreases. And when you have that, if you don't have that solid foundation behind you, things begin to crack, right? It's just normal. That's the way it is. And so one of the statements that was hard for us to even begin to say out loud, because it's not that you want to really push it on, this is just how we began to see it, is that the same thing of where we were just talking a little bit about mental health, where you can't really out exercise a bad diet, right? It doesn't matter how much exercise or how many times I go to the gym. Now, that might not be true for every single person, because there's some elite humans that have bodies that can do that, right? And I am happy for those people. But for most of the average Joes of us in our life, it doesn't work that way, right? If I eat 5 cakes that day, I'm probably going to see it on my backside, right?
That's right.
And so we try and think about that on the operation, right? You can't outsell an operation that can't stand on its own. You can't outwork it either. And that's where I think most CEOs get to, is they're like, I can outwork this. These problems show up, but if I just put in more time or more hours or I hire more people, this will stop. But actually it just continues to compound, because now it's not that the problems go away. You just have a different set of them, whether that's culture fracture from promoting people that were really good at the job they have, but they're not so great at the job you've given them now. And you wonder why it's not happening, right? You're like, they were so good at this, and now I've given them a better position, because in your mind it's a better role, but it might not be for that human, right? Or you'll see things like, well, we have sold so much this month, I don't know how we're going to handle it. And so those are things that are very operational. One of my favorite stories is about the Titanic. So most people think the Titanic sunk because it hit an iceberg, and for the most part, that is correct, right? It did hit an iceberg and it did take the boat down. But if there is this version of the story that the captain couldn't get the binoculars out to see the iceberg because the keys were misplaced. And that's an operational issue, right? Those keys were taken by the incorrect human that should never have had them, because they were supposed to be in the emergency box, so that if anything like this happened, there was then visibility into the iceberg. So though oncoming ships were saying, you're going to hit this iceberg, move, there was no visibility into the problem. And so that's a lot of time what I think happens to CEOs as we grow, right? I think you've probably been there. I've been there for sure. And no shame in it, of like, it changes and it grows and you learn things. And so the first few years in business, I think for most people, they have a version of what they're going to do. And then what they actually build might be slightly different, but it will become stronger, right? It will be stronger because you've learned parts of what you didn't know before. And one thing we like to remind people is that, you only have the information you have today because you learned it through experience somewhere along the way. If you had that experience and that knowledge when you made the decision, you might have made a different decision, but you didn't. Right? You didn't. The information did not exist over here. So stop putting so much weight back there and say, okay, I know that these things are showing up. Let's create a foundation and an operation that can support and facilitate that, so that your deliverable doesn't have to be compromised. And that is the one part I don't want people to do, is compromise their deliverable because they're trying to outwork an operation that simply can't be outworked. I can't eat the 5 cakes and not exercise. Even if
That's
I
right.
exercise, 3 cakes are
Yeah.
still going to show up. I might have worked
That's
off
right.
2, but 3 of them are still going to be there. And so
That's right.
if we can help people almost shift that mindset to build an operation, then we can also take on the financial component, because we now have systems that deliver information. We now have data gathering opportunities. We now have ways that people are at max capacity and can have a conversation with us to do what they need to do versus that sort of constant overwhelm.
Yeah. So talk to me about like, what is the first step? Like, I mean, you hear as a new business owner, I remember, 5 years ago, like, get together your operations. What does that even mean? Is that a document? Is that a system? Is that a software? Like, is that a notebook? Like, what is that? What does that really mean, like, tangibly, for someone who maybe has that 5 to 10 person team who's still kind of wearing, the CEO and the CFO and the CMO hat, but then they're starting to put these people together. What is the beginning stages? Like, where do we start? What does the beginning stages of that look like?
So I like to think of this more on like a boutique basis rather than a big box basis, because here's my belief around it, simply again from things I've seen, is that if you build a system that your users don't like or won't use, the system is pointless, right? And that can be from technology, process, workflow, doesn't matter. I kind of think of things in a couple of ways. We've got policy, which is the rules. That's the big fence around the yard, right? That policy makes us stay in the sandbox that we should be in. The procedure is how we... Yeah, right. Just a fence. It's a guardrail around us all to make sure we all do what we need to do to get to where we're going. And then you've kind of got the procedure, which is what happens inside the fence. Like, where's my area inside this fence? Am I on the swings, or am I over here on the roundabout? Am I on, where am I in there? And then a workflow might be how we get around it or pass things off to each other, right? When there's multiple facets involved, we need a workflow in addition to, because the procedure is telling us we need to do this, but who's involved in that? What tools do we need in that? So we try and build it very, step by step to know, like, look, if you think about someone who buys a new home, and say they're a dog owner and they came from a yard that was fenced and now they don't have a fenced yard. They can't let the dog out to roam, right? Dog can't go anywhere. So in a strange way, lots of people think putting a fence in is more constrictive, but actually it's more freeing, right? The dog can run around in that space now when it couldn't when you didn't have the yard. So the fence isn't about taking things away. It's about putting a frame around the furthest part we can push to. So that we know we're not crossing over those things or get standing on people's toes with the workflows, right? It's like that's that person's domain. And how do we then all interact? And that allows us to see communication. It allows us to see how we pass things off. It's almost like having a roadmap, right? If you get up in the middle of the night and you need to go to the bathroom, and you go and you get into the bathroom, you hit the light switch and no light comes on, you might stub your toe, you might walk into the wrong place, you might
be in the closet.
Yeah, you're going to end up being in the closet, right? But if you go in there and you flip on the light and it illuminates, the pathway to take. And that's what your operation should do. So from procedures to just like, where does the person take the next step? Where can they make a decision so that it doesn't all have to come back to you? And to me, that's where sort of the base underbelly of operations comes from, because it's super broad. It can be in operations and sales, operations and systems, operations and marketing, operations in the operation. But we like to think of it, let's get that big concrete slab and the fence around it, right? So we know where we're all playing. We all know what we can do. And then we can actually, that allows ingenuity and creativity to happen, because we have this thing called the Bermuda Triangle of business, right? And we draw the triangle, and it's the right people in the wrong role, the way it's always been done, and chaotic workflows, right? And that is you're not going to get out the Bermuda Triangle until we start to chip away at some of these pillars to then say, why has it always been done that way, and does it have to be? If it has to be, okay, then we have to allow the measurement to come into the people that are working there now and give them an understanding of that, okay? We can start to break the triangle down and help that become more of like a 3-legged stool as opposed to a triangle they're bouncing around in.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so good. And I see this in a totally different area. I mean, we're in marketing, but sometimes when I talk to people, I have to take this like role of business coach going, I can't tell you, Denise, whether it's a brand new business, which is more understandable, but there are some business owners that have been in business for decades that I've spoken to, that I say the words, then what happens?
Yep.
And they have no idea.
Yeah.
Then what happens? Which is totally more understandable in a brand new business because we're like, we don't know yet. We only serve 5 clients. But if you've been in business for 20 years, and I think this is where a lot of business owners fall into not being able to grow, losing product and service quality, which is, like the client experience suffers, the product experience suffers. It's because they've had someone in this position for 10 years who, again, has been promoted from, maybe like a waiter to mid-management to now they're like the leader. Now they're the CEO, and everything is in here. It's all in their brain. And even the owner of the business doesn't know what happens next.
Right.
And that's a huge problem.
Right. And the way we sort of frame that is that most businesses that we are chatting with tell us that they're struggling to make money or that they're struggling to grow. And what we know when they say this is that 9 times out of 10, they have been designed not to make money. Now, that doesn't mean they're not generating sales. It doesn't mean they're not generating dollars. It means they've been designed not to become profitable, because it's the same concept as sort of, 10x, 2x versus 10x, or whatever that book's called, right? If you make double the money with double the effort, you're flat. That makes no sense, right? You've got to 10x it. And so we kind of think of that in the same way, is that every inefficiency and every system bottleneck and every operational flaw is actually baked in, not intentionally, but it is because you have some of these we call them linchpin people that know everything about something. And if they go, it feels like your business will collapse. Yeah. And if you have things that are then built into a proper operation, so to speak, that doesn't occur because those things are public. They're in a place that people can see them. Yeah. More people are responsible for the areas that they oversee instead of the crossover that happens. And it allows that roadmap to become very illuminated so that you know exactly where you stand, exactly where your decisions lie and where someone else's do. And that's what then, brings a good team together, because all the cogs are starting to intersect and become the end product and allow the deliverable to really continue to be what it should be and what everybody knows that it can be, without compromising it because you just don't have enough capacity or enough time, or you're trying to simply outwork that operation that's been designed not to make money.
Yeah, man, that's huge. And I think that comes into play too with, fractured leadership, fractured teams, because you have this person who has all the knowledge, and like sometimes they can hold that knowledge hostage. They can hold it over your head as a leader. And I can't help but think, I know you're raising a couple of teenage kids. Our last of 5, God bless, is 16, 1 left in the house, 3.5 grandchildren. We're almost there, Denise. But like, I can't help but my brain as a mother comes back to this boundaries of children and raising kids, and kind of that adolescent that's going to push and push and push that fence or that boundary because they don't know what is expected of them. Right. And, I know there's a big thing lately with like a whole different kind of parenting, but I have found in my parenting that they need limits. They want limits. When they understand their limits and what their job is, it allows for more accountability. It allows for much more, like, especially like my 20-year-old son, for instance, I could never guilt him in. I couldn't spank him in. I couldn't ground him into any kind of submission. But what worked so well for that kid was very exceedingly clear expectations. Yeah. If this, then that. This is the expectation of you. If this doesn't happen, then this is the consequence. And he always did better with that. And I feel like, why are we not giving our teams that same courtesy of, I hear so much burnout, we're having turnover of employees, and more and more I hear when I see employee surveys or exit interviews, I hear, I wasn't clear on our mission, our vision, or what my responsibility was in relationship to everybody else. So it's not just about productivity and profitability, but that those softer sides of your business that are just so freaking hard to control these days with your people, this is going to help you exponentially, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the way you framed it there is like the clear expectations. What we've discovered doing this for a long time is that perception and expectation are 2 different things, and we have to define those in a better way as leaders. Our perception and understanding of how we want things done and how someone's going to complete it will always be different unless we line out the specifics, right? So if I'm expecting a report to come back to me with certain things, I need to make sure that that's clear in the instruction, because if I just say, create me a cash report, I would say everyone on my team would create it differently. Right? Because they all think about cash in a different way, right? I'm thinking about it from all of the angles, but maybe my bookkeeper only thinks about it from, well, do they have cash in the bank? Can I pay the bills? My operations person might think about, well, I need money to make this new hire with HR. What are we going to do about that? Right? We all think about it. So ops comes from an expenditure side, the CEOs and the revenue side. The bookkeepers like, do we have enough to pay this? You know, our salespeople are like, did we sell this and collect it? So if I ask for a cash report from anybody, that could look wildly different. Whereas my expectation is I'm looking for a cash burn report, which is going to tell me how much cash I have in the bank and how many days left do I have before I'm out, right? And so if I don't say I need a cash burn report that shows me X, Y, and Z, my bookkeeper's never going to create that. And I can't expect it by just saying the words cash report, because one thing we've learned is language creates words. Right. And words create worlds maybe is a little more simple to say, is that when my words create a world for someone else. And so what have I not defined for them? And there's a great book called Question Before the Question. And it's one of the things that I read really early on in when I got first promoted to a CFO, and it was my first like C-suite role. I read this book, Question Before the Question, and it's a tiny book. It's, I think, maybe 60 pages, takes 30 minutes to read, not long. And it's all about asking the question before you're asking that direct question of why didn't you do this? It's what did I not provide for this person to not provide this? Or what instructions did I not convey correctly? Or what did I maybe not see in their emotional state that I should have before putting this giant project on them? And so we do things like something called a monthly 3-2-1. So 3 things that went well, 2 things that aren't going so great, and 1 thing that you need my direct support on to get your job moving. And that way that every month, no one has to feel ashamed or embarrassed about the 1 thing that I'm not supporting them on, right? But I also get this lens into, well, I'm jamming up the day here, or how do I get out of the way of that? Because I don't really need to be involved in it, or things like that, right? That then allow us to have an operation that functions, people feel empowered. They're not afraid to then say something when it's going wrong, rather than you having to go back and rework months and months and months of the wrong thing. Because we try and create the culture around candor, right? If I'm annoying you, please tell me. I'm not meaning to. I don't wake up today and go, I'm going to go annoy person A with my nonsense today. I usually wake up with like, I need these things, but if what I'm doing is driving you nuts, I'd like to know so that I can probably stop doing that without you walking out the door 4 months from now pissed off because I said something that then just the straw broke the camel's back, right? So every 100%. Month bring that candor to your 3-2-1, because I do want to know. I want to know what you've achieved, because I might be running in the seat that's driving, that I might not see some of those big lifts that have happened in a smaller component. And I want to know those so we can celebrate them, as well as, then tweaking things that of the 2 things that aren't going so well.
Oh man, 100%. And like when it's a part of the boundary, when that feedback loop, or not feedback loop, but when that feedback procedure, the 3-2-1 or whatever, is like part of what we do, it's just part of the culture, then it's less, team member against Denise. It's like, it's my experience versus this framework. And it's not personal anymore. Like you can be like, okay, look, here's the 2 things that are really annoying me about you. And I think it opens up the conversation. And I love that we're kind of like full circle now back in this conversation, because what I keep kind of hearing is that it's about the story of our business. How does this business work? And if we don't this is so true in everything, especially even like being transparent with your children, being transparent with your team, your family, your spouse, your partner. If you don't tell them the story, they're going to make one up, and it's going to be way worse. It's going to be way harder. It's going to be way more complicated than what was really needed or expected, or getting it physically, or getting into that emotional space. They're going to make up a story. So tell them the story. Give your team and yourself the blessing and the courtesy of putting together some operations and your story of what happens next. What happens next in our business? And then you can start looking at those financials and go, okay, let's make sure we do have enough money until the end of the week, but we're going to make sure this procedure is working and that this thing is going to be profitable in a way that's going to sustain our business for our goals long term. It's fantastic.
And one of the things that you can always see from it is when you have consistency in what you're doing, you can start to pinpoint the part that it's not working, right? Because you're doing the same thing all the time. But if I'm doing different things all the time and trying new things, I don't really know where it's not going right, or like what tiny little grain of sand is stuck in that gear. And that's where we want to evaluate it, which is why sometimes we write a process and then rewrite it. It's all right, you know, because we realize
the living document.
Exactly. And when we can put it in a live space where everybody can see it, we can build sort of what we call an employee intranet environment that then allows people to go and see it and go and like experience it and know where the forms are and know how to fill things out. And it's constant. It's just a way of working. And then everyone knows what's expected of them all the time because it ties back into the KPIs. It ties into the mission, vision, values. It ties into what we're trying to do every day. And when that changes, we can also change all of those things that have the knock-on effect because we know how it's designed.
That's awesome, man. Okay. I can't believe we've talked. I told her I was going to try to keep it 30 to 45 minutes. Here we are at almost an hour. I could keep going with Denise all day, but she's going to need to take her rest. So I would love for you to invite the listeners to, you've got a couple of resources, one for nonprofits and then one for a small business. Can you tell us briefly about those? We will link those in the show notes. Also, all of her links to her website, her socials will be in the show notes. So if you have a business that is just, maybe you're brand new, or maybe you've been in business 10 years and you can't answer that question, what happens next? Or you're feeling some fracture in your team, or maybe you're going like, more is not more all of a sudden. It seems like more should be more and more is not mooring. Denise and her team can definitely help you figure out how to get more from less, even as long as you got those things documented. So tell us really quick about those resources and we'll let you go on with your day.
Sure. So for the nonprofit side of things, we've got this resource called Spheres of Influence, which is a business-to-business impact, right? How can boards and nonprofit employees begin to think about the process of relationship building for cultivation of funding? And so looking at sort of the discovery and going through those spheres, what we create is something called the Spheres of Influence that they can connect you with. So 5 people that you can connect us with, 4 people that might be in our niche that we need to connect with, 3 people that we think we could partner with, 2 people that need us, and 1 person that could maybe cultivate some philanthropy. And really thinking about that through every board member and employee perspective, because sometimes in the nonprofit sphere, it's not all about cultivation of dollars themselves. You do need things to happen that are not just money based. Well, that is important. I know that, right? As a finance person, I can't just defer that. You know, my CFO heart would sink. But there are other ways to begin to create avenues and sort of open doors into the philanthropic sphere that sometimes we miss because we're just not having that conversation every day. And the second one for small businesses, it's really to think about who you are, right? Defining whether you are big box or whether you're boutique, because that is really what impacts the way your operation sets up. It gives you that concrete slab, that fence around things, because you know you're either more dependent on the client for the deliverable or it's wash, rinse, repeat. This should be churning through. And you might have a hybrid, right? I want to say that sometimes people are a hybrid. Parts of their things are wash, rinse, repeat, and we have to do it in that format, and some are boutique. And so even the understanding that some of these things are hybrid become less frustrating for people because they're not trying to do it and fit it all into, you know, the sort of round peg in a square hole kind of analogy, that it's just not going in there no matter how much I force it, right? I'm like, it doesn't work because it's not the way it should be. And so we think that when you go through the questions, the document itself will tell you this is what you are.
That'll be very helpful.
Based on your ranking, what do your answers really tell you? And then you can say, is that what I expected? Am I really doing that? That's strange. Or okay, cool, I'm on the right path. I'm working that way. So I think that'll be a good resource as well.
That's great. That'll be a great resource because so many of our listeners are just starting their business or they're fairly new, 3 to 5 years in the entrepreneurship. And sometimes we don't really know what we are until that 5-10 year mark, even until we can kind of figure out what works, figure out what doesn't work, get a little experience, which I like to, failure is experience. It's either you're going to live or you're going to learn or you're going to, you're going to learn or you're going to grow. Right.
And I think also just having people then also begin to realize what they want. Right. It isn't actually that selfish, nor are you taking away from someone else by defining what you want in your life or your career or your business. Don't attack it because you think it should be. Attack it because it's what you want.
Man, that's good. That's good. So many of us get into business and we're like 5 years down the road, you're looking at going, am I even doing what I want to do anymore? Like, go use Denise's tool, take this assessment, see where you're at and where maybe you can either split your operations or really hone in and focus on something that's going to move you forward. So thank you so much for your time, Denise. I am feeling very blessed by your presence today. I feel so connected with you. I'm so glad we met.
You're amazing. Me too. Likewise. I'm so glad I got to be here and chat with you today. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for being a queen that leads.
Oh, thank you. Right back at you. Thanks for having this space for us all to be here.
You're awesome.
The Queen's Lead podcast is recorded worldwide and produced by the kick-ass media team at the Height Digital home base in Nicaragua. Until our next episode, stay real, queens, and go lead. Remember to tap that follow and leave your review. For freebies and more real, inspiring content you love, go to amysingleton.net and connect with Amy on our socials at @TheRealAmySingleton.
One more thing. This is the legal language, what my lawyer wrote and what I need to read to you. This podcast is presented for educational and entertainment purposes only. I am Amy Singleton, and I'm just your friend. Although I may speak to many on this show, I am not a psychotherapist, a business coach, a doctor, a CPA, a lawyer, or probably anyone who should be giving you professional advice. This podcast is not a substitute for a relationship with your doctor, coach, or any other licensed professional. Got it? Good. Now go be a queen and follow me at @TheRealAmySingleton.